G'day, welcome to the Digger History Podcast. My name's Keith. Today I'll be playing bagpipes at a memorial service for veterans of the Korean War. On the 27th of July 1953, an armistice was signed for the ceasefire of the Korean War. The Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War, as it is often overshadowed in history by the Second World War and the Vietnam War. The Korean War started 5 years after the end of World War II and went for just over 3 years. During this time, around 18,000 Australian service personnel served in the conflict. 340 of these lost their lives, around 1,200 were wounded, and 29 became prisoners of war. So during this episode, I'm going to talk about the origins of the Korean War, why Australians were involved, and some of the key moments in the Australian experience of the Korean War. But before I go on, I just want to thank you guys for listening to this podcast. It really helps to see the number of listeners go up. Feel free to put comments on the podcast, and look, if you have anything you want me to do an episode on, post them in the comments, please. And look, please subscribe to this podcast. It all helps. So the Korean Peninsula is divided into two countries, so roughly in half. So the top half is North Korea and the bottom half South Korea. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, for most of the history of Korea, it was only the one country, and the chain of events that led to Korea being divided into the two nations goes back to 1910, when Japan annexed the Korean Peninsula. So for 35 years, Korea was occupied by Japan. Now, World War II ended on the 2nd of September 1945, when Japan surrendered to the Allies. But interestingly, Russia, who had been an ally with Britain and America in the European side of World War II against Germany, only actually declared war on Japan on the 8th of August 1945, so less than a month before the Japanese surrender. So Russia was a part of the war against Japan, but only kind of in that last month. But that's where the division started between North and South, as similarly as it happened in Germany, where we had East and West Germany, where the Russians administered the eastern part and the Allies administered the western part of Germany. Similarly, in Korea, the Soviet Union occupied the northern part of Korea, while America occupied the southern part. Now, this was only supposed to be a temporary measure, with Korea eventually supposed to be handed over to back to the Koreans when they could elect a suitable government. So the line drawn between North and South, roughly halfway up the peninsula, the Korean Peninsula, was known as the 38th parallel. Now this line, the 30th parallel, was basically drawn by people with a map that that didn't consult the Korean people at all. It was just agreed on between the Soviets and Americans. Now, as I said, this division was only supposed to be temporary, but there was increasing differences in the way that both halves of the Korean Peninsula were being run. So in the north, a Soviet-backed communist government emerged, while in the south, an American-backed government emerged, and each government claimed to be the legitimate government for the whole of Korea. Both governments wanted to unify Korea under their system of government. Now, officially, the Korean War started on the 25th of June 1950 when North Korea invaded South Korea. But there had been skirmishes in the years beforehand, and around 10,000 people from North and South Korea were killed in these skirmishes. But officially, as I said, the war began on the 25th of June 1950 when North Korea crossed the 30th parallel and invaded South Korea. Within 3 days, North Korea had occupied the South Korean capital of Seoul. South Korean forces fell back towards the southern port of Busan, and that's when the United Nations got involved, and they called for a multinational force to intervene. So 22 countries in total contributed military or medical forces to the United Nations. This included 16 countries that contributed combat troops. So the majority of these troops were provided by South Korea and the United States, but also United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, France, Turkey, Greece, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Philippines, Thailand, Colombia, and Ethiopia all sent combat troops. And Sweden, India, Denmark, Norway, Italy, and West Germany provided hospital support, hospital units, medical units, medical ships as well. So Australia was one of the first countries to commit troops to Korea, with the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy all contributing. Number 77 Squadron RAAF was already based in Japan, and they entered combat service almost immediately. So initially 77 Squadron flew Mustangs, which were a piston engine aircraft from World War II, but were later re-equipped with Gloster Meteor jet aircraft. So 77 Squadron were actually the first non-Korean US unit to join the United Nations forces in the Korean War. So they were based in Japan at the time and were pretty much in the thick of it from the start. So as I said, for the first year they were flying P-51 piston engine Mustangs. After 1951 they re-equipped the Gloster Meteor jets. So that they were in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. So for the duration of the war, and during this time they flew 19,000 operational sorties. So that's around 17 sorties a day for the duration of the war. 41 of the pilots were killed, 7 were captured as POWs, and 54 Meteors were lost. 9 Royal Australian Navy ships served in the Korean War. The aircraft carrier HMAS Sydney, the destroyers HMAS Bataan, Warramunga, Anzac and Tobruk. 4 frigates, HMAS Shoalhaven, Murchison, Condamine and Colga. The aircraft that flew from HMAS Sydney were Hawker Sea Furies and Ferry Fireflies. And they provided ground attack, escort, air defence missions, reconnaissance and anti-submarine patrols. 3 Navy personnel were killed during the Korean War, and 14 Navy aircraft were lost. The 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment was initially deployed, and they were later joined by 1 RAAF and 2 RAAF, and the 3 units became part of the British Commonwealth Division, which also included Canadian, New Zealand and South African troops. The Battle of Kapion is probably the most famous Korean battle that Australians were involved in April 1951, and that's another episode in itself, because I kind of want to do that a bit of justice. I had a recent trip to Canada, as I mentioned in the last episode, and I was on I went to Calgary, went to the military museums in Calgary, and I knew that Canadians were involved in the Battle of Kapion, but you kind of hear it a lot more from the Australian perspective, so it was good to see it more from another perspective, and I want to do a lot more research on this, but I will definitely be doing an episode on the Battle of Kapion. So the Battle of Kapion occurred between the 23rd and 25th of April 1951. 3 RAAF and the 2nd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry made a defensive stand against a Chinese division and saved Seoul from being recaptured. So around 1,400 Australian and Canadians stood in the path of a Chinese force of around 6,000 soldiers. As I said, this deserves an episode in its own, and having recently visited that museum in Calgary, it's definitely on my list to do. Both the Australian and Canadian units were awarded the United States Presidential Unit Citation for their stand in Kapion. Having said that, the Kiwis also played a crucial role in Kapion. The 16th Field Regiment, Royal New Zealand Artillery, operating 45-pounder field guns. So they kept the fire onto the Chinese forces. In 48 hours of the battle, they fired around 10,000 rounds of ammunition. 32 Australians were killed during the Battle of Kapion, 59 wounded and 5 captured. One of the casualties was the acting commanding officer of 3 RAAF, Major Bernard O'Dowd, was killed in action. In total, 10,000 657 Australian Army personnel were deployed to Korea, and of them 292 lost their lives. In total, 340 Australians lost their lives during the Korean War. Included in this count are 44 Australian personnel who are missing in action, presumed dead, and have no known grave. And another 16 Australians died in the 4 years after the war, while they served with United Nations peacekeeping forces. On the 19th of July 1953, an agreement was signed for an armistice putting a stop to the fighting in the Korean War, but the war is technically not over. Although an armistice was signed to pause the fighting, there has never been an official end to the Korean War. So, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, today there's a memorial service which I'm playing bagpipes at, and now I'm recording this part of the podcast after that's happened. So I've played at the service, and it's always a great honour to be asked to do these things, whether it's Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, Korean Veterans Day, Vietnam Veterans Day. It is a great honour to be invited to play at these things. I played at Laurelton, a little town on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and it was an honour to have two Korean War veterans at the service there today. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, the Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War. It was between the Second World War and the Vietnam War, two high-profile wars, and it's often forgotten. I don't remember hearing much about it when I was at school. I heard about World War II, World War I. I heard about Vietnam. I heard about Gallipoli, but I don't remember hearing much about the Korean War. But the Korean War was definitely a significant part in Australia's military history. So, look, thanks again for listening to the podcast. I really do appreciate you guys listening. I hope you got something out of it, and as I said earlier, if there's something that you'd like me to do an episode about, feel free to pop something in the comments. I'll do my best to research and do an episode in the future on it. Thanks again, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye.